Hey folks, apologies for the massively windswept appearance. Just been out; it's very, very windy outside at the moment. But I thought I'd throw in this entry into the Richard Lehman book review series while I got a chance. With book number 31 in this series, which just so happens to be the very last book that I would consider to be bad. After this, we're going to start going to slightly more positive territory. It's going to take a while before we get to the good stuff. But this is the best of the bad books, in my opinion. It's all just opinion. Again, if you disagree with the placings of any of these books, then that's absolutely fine. We all like what we like. And, more power to you for enjoying stuff I haven't. But we're going to be looking at a bit of an unusual book today. Because in Lehman's career, he wrote a lot of stuff between 1970 and 1980. His very first published work is Fiends from the novella. A novella called Fiends from the short story collection Fiends. It's the first story in that collection, the biggest one. Also, one of the worst things he ever wrote, with an ending so completely bizarre that it defies belief. If you've read it, honestly, you know what I mean. It's out there. But he also wrote several, not only a whole bunch of short stories, but he also wrote several novels, two of which were initially rejected, one of which was published. Now, the one that was published, his first novel, was The Cellar, which we'll talk about when we get to it. The other one that was rejected, I'll talk to that when I get to that. But the remaining rejected novel was a novel called All Hallows Eve. It was finished in 1978, but it wasn't actually published until 1985. And what I think's happened is that Lehman, he wasn't a very confident author up until the early 90s. He had a lot of, especially with his second novel, suffering disastrously in the States. He was quite willing to do whatever publishers wanted, and his popularity, especially in the UK, but also in places like Japan, I got a bit of a story about that later, and Australia was ramping up. Absolutely dreadful today, don't I? Oh, blimey. And he his publishers, I think, around the mid-80s, that's when he really started to churn out the books, and he was really starting to build a name for himself. I think they asked him if he had any books left for publication, because he was working on the Beast House book, which would be the first novel that he'd release, which really showed a degree of skill in its construction, I'd say. But prior to that, he sent them this. Like I say, this was a book that was written in the 70s, and it was rejected. And Lehman's been very honest about that in his on writing, on Lehman's terms writing book, which is all about his career. He speaks about this being one of his rejected novels. Lehman had quite a few rejected novels, as we'll go through, some of which appeared after his death. But this one, the publishers have obviously taken because they wanted to get a book out with his name on, and they haven't done anything to correct the reasons why it's been rejected. They've just released it, and it's a real oddity. Like I say, this is the best of Lehman's, in my opinion, at least, bad books, but it's also a fascinating book. Firstly, the artwork. I mean, Steve Crisp did the majority of the artwork for Richard Lehman's books. He was a great artist, and he drew exactly what the books were about, or key scenes from the books, and All Hallows Eve just looks fantastic. I think most of Lehman's, especially the early day books, look great until they started to squash the image up. They were paintings. A lot of the book companies now release really generic looking, and I've moaned about this for years, art that doesn't really showcase anything about the book. But back in the 80s especially, you'd get a lot of books that just had really great artwork, really showed a love, and gave the book an element of why it was worth owning physical stuff back in the day, as opposed to all this digital stuff these days. The book itself is pretty short. The story of this is fairly simple. There's a kid who lives with his mom, and doesn't know who his dad is, and is bullied at school quite mercilessly by the other kids. And he decides that he wants to get revenge on them. Now, he's in cahoots with somebody else, and that somebody else is planning a bit of a murder fest. And there's an abandoned house in town that's like considered to be a haunted house. And it's revealed very early on that he's going to be having a party on Halloween in this house, which people are fairly excited about. Obviously, there's an alternative reason for all this. So far, fairly standard story. I have to spoil large chunks of this, in fact, the majority of this book, in order to really detail why I think this is both a bad book, but also appearing at number 31 on this list as the best of the bad books. So, for a start, it's all over the place. It's a very short book, but it's just the structure is utterly bonkers. There's a large amount of this book, which is basically a police procedural sort of investigation by the cop in this, who is sort of this kid's mom's new boyfriend, who also, in true Richard Lehman fashion, he's investigating a missing police officer, and he believes he knows who the suspect is, and he follows his trail to this motel. He literally meets this woman at this motel who's the owner or works there, and basically falls in love with her within a space of about 5 words. And then he's torn with this moral dilemma of whether he actually loves this kid's mum or whether we'd rather spend more time with this woman, who literally is trying to throw herself at him at every opportunity. Despite the fact that the only thing she knows about him is his name and that he's a cop, or that he said he's a cop. He knows her name and that she works in a motel area, and that's it. They have no reason whatsoever, but they fall in love, which is just bonkers. It's a trait of a lot of Layman's stories. Layman's characters do not have behavioural arcs like normal human beings. They literally fall in love within seconds of meeting each other, and often beautiful women fall in love with real jerks who have no redeeming qualities whatsoever. And it's bizarre, but you just have to accept it as you go forward with Layman's work. It's just part and parcel of what he writes. It's not about character, it's about story. But we've got large parts of this who are about this police procedural bit, which I personally thought was quite interesting. I liked the trail, but I know that a lot of people have said they find it quite boring. This kid himself is mercilessly bullied, and the way in which he's bullied is often a bit contrived and stuff. But here's one of the first big weird things about this book. There's a girl who's really popular at school, and she's having a party at Halloween. And everyone that this kid knows is going to this party, so he's trying to convince other people to go to his party at this haunted house, which people are interested in, but nobody really seems to want to go there. And I can't for the life of me figure out how, unless one of the ridiculous things in this story actually happened, it was a very contrived thing that was designed to set the plot forwards. Basically, some kids gate crash the first party, it ends, so they go to this haunted house instead. If that hadn't happened, I don't understand how this kid was planning to get anybody to this haunted house, because nobody wants to go, and everyone, including him, go to this other party instead. So if this gate crashing hadn't happened, nobody would have gone to this haunted house bit, and nothing else would have happened in the book. It's revealed, and again, I'm going to have to do spoilers, that the other that this kid's working with is his dad. He hasn't seen his dad in his entire life, so he has no evidence that it's his dad. His dad raped his mom, which is why he was born, and has been in prison for years and has got out because, again, with Layman, characters that go to prison for awful deeds have very lenient sentences, get out and carry on doing exactly what they were doing. They don't learn, they're never reformed, they're always awful human beings, and their sentences are incredibly short. So this guy's got out, contacted his son, and together they're planning to... The kid wants to basically scare the life out of all the people that have upset him. The dad just wants to murder people. But the kid, I don't know how these two ever met. It's not explained how they met or how they know each other at all. It should be pretty much impossible for these two to have ever met. But they have, and they do. Despite the fact the kid doesn't even know what the guy looks like. He's never seen his dad. His dad speaks to him from the shadows of this house. So it could be anyone. But his dad's plan, and this is bizarre, his dad's plan is to hide in this haunted house in a gorilla costume on the wall, hung up on the wall until everyone enters, and then come off and start killing people. If no one turned up, he would be left there in the gorilla costume, well, presumably forever. And so, yeah, it's really, really strange. it's the ending of this book. I don't want to reveal too much about it. I mentioned in Cuts that we had a book with two parts, where the second part was about 3 or 4% of the book. It was literally a couple of pages and it was all over. This book sums up every single thing in the story within literally a single page. We've got a whole bunch of stuff happening. There's a lot of action towards the end, but there's still lots of questions that you're left with. And at the end, it's almost like Layman stops the story mid-action and then wrote a single page of that happened because that was that's that, this is sorted, and that's the end. It's literally the most sudden and sort of just tacked on ending, I think, in any Layman book. Really could have done with a bit of tidying up by an editor, or at least extending some of it, but it just felt like he was bored of the story and just thought, right, sod it, that's what we're going to do. Despite all of these bizarre flaws, and there are many more, it is a really messy, sloppy written. Clearly you can see why it was a rejected novel. I still had fun with it. I appreciate that it's bad. It is a bad book. There's nothing, I don't know what that was, literally a bubble's come out of me also. It is a bad book. I guarantee it's a bad book. And I think anybody watching these videos probably watches less for the story, the stuff I'm talking about, and more for the bizarre things that happen to me. But I still kind of like it. There's something very odd about it. There's something quite interesting. It's less... This book doesn't... Although it does reference certain unpleasant things, it doesn't have any of the real excess and nastiness of a lot of Layman's other stuff. It feels tamer. It's less focused on sex and violence and more on a story. And I kind of just like the slightly less excessive nature of it, especially compared to a lot of other books that Layman released at this time, which were really over the top with those elements. It's always fun to read stuff that's set around Halloween. There's a lot of vivid imagery with the book that stuck with me, which I quite like as well. And I was never bored by it. I raced through the book in literally a single sitting. I was left scratching my head thinking, what on earth was this all about? Very bizarre. Clearly a badly constructed and written book, but one which has moments that I still remember and that I enjoyed. So it's an odd one. I can't recommend it. I can't put it any higher on this list because there are a lot of books, well, I mean, for all of the books, it's just simply better. But despite the fact it's bad, it is, as I said earlier, the best of Richard Layman's bad books, and I still enjoyed it for what it was. So I'm putting it number 31 for that.